In a future where the relentless advance of climate change has transformed the Arctic into a realm of tepid waters and fractured ice. The world as once known has crumbled into ruin. Coastal cities lie submerged beneath rising tides. Monuments of human ambition now drowned in a brackish sea. And countless species have either migrated far or faded into oblivion. Amid this desolation, a resilient cadre of scientists has clung to survival aboard a mobile research station, a lone outpost straddling the merciless edge of what was once an unyielding expanse of ice. Their purpose is as noble as it is desperate: to salvage the genetic memory of the polar bear, a creature that embodied the raw, untamed spirit of the Arctic, by cryogenically preserving its embryonic forms, hoping to spark a renaissance of the wild even if the natural order is nearly lost. Day after day, the scientists toiled in an environment where the ice, once a perennial shield of nature's grandeur, has nearly melted away into a chaotic, slushy mosaic. The station itself, a fortress of ingenuity amid the ravaged wilderness, buzzed constantly with the hum of life-saving machinery and the fervent urgency of experiments designed to outlast an apocalypse. Their work was interlaced with dread, for in the bleak backdrop of environmental collapse, whispers had begun circulating, a dread rumor that even as man attempted to preserve one of nature's greatest wonders, a curse long thought confined to folklore was reawakening. In the ruins of civilization, some saw the unmistakable stench of decay and the palpable aura of desperation. They spoke in hushed tones of a being that had once been sealed away in the sacred depths of ancestral wilderness, the Wendigo, now reborn to feed upon the misery and ruin left by humanity's insatiable hunger. It was in this world of fractured ice and broken dreams that the last of the wild polar bears, emaciated, wandering, and desperate, stumbled across the barren lands. Few in number now, these majestic creatures were specters of a bygone era, their once thick coats diminished and their once commanding roars reduced to soft, forlorn echoes. Their eyes, filled with the quiet agony of starvation and the weight of a legacy nearly erased, told a story of sorrow and persistence. They roamed in solitude, their survival hanging by a thread as they scoured isolated patches of ice drifting in a warming sea. Meanwhile, hidden in the penumbra of collapsed forests and the ruins of coastal splendor, the Wendigo had stirred from its centuries-old slumber, born of ancient tribal legend and nurtured by the very decay wrought by human excess. This Wendigo was no ghost of myth alone. It was an entity that had absorbed the remnants of a civilization in ruin. It feasted upon the despair permeating the post-apocalyptic world, growing stronger, hungrier, and more malevolent with every passing day. Its form, gaunt and twisted, bore the eerie imprint of what it had taken: fragments of strength and spirit that once coursed through the mighty polar bear. This spectral abomination was driven by a hunger that transcended mere sustenance. It craved the life energy of any living creature. And in its unquenchable thirst, no survivor would be spared. As fate would have it, a violent confrontation was inevitable. One stormy night, when darkness pressed close and the few remaining ice fields trembled under the weight of relentless heat, the research station itself became the unwilling stage for calamity. The Wendigo, drawn to the scattered life of the region and buoyed by the despair that clung to every ruined structure, made its assault. Under a sky heavy with smoldering clouds and the distant, mournful glimmer of what once was, the unholy entity infiltrated the station. Alarm bells shrieked against the icy silence as machinery faltered and the stark reality of human vulnerability was laid bare. In the ensuing chaos, several scientists fell victim to the creature's predatory wrath, their lives snuffed out like fragile candles in a relentless storm. Panic rippled through the station, and amidst the blood and wreckage, a spark of desperate hope emerged. One of the few polar bears still being monitored, an animal tagged with a tracking device for conservation purposes, became the unlikely focus of the survivors. Revered as a living remnant of nature's might and as a potential guardian, this battered creature embodied all that was precious and pure in a world ravaged by apocalyptic despair. With grim resolve, the research team made a fateful decision: they would release the bear from its containment, hoping that its natural instincts and inherent strength could serve as a bulwark against the encroaching darkness of the Wendigo. Under a vast expanse of a somber but unwavering sky, the scientists scrambled to free the bear. The animal, though weakened by the harsh conditions and the physical toll of isolation, carried an aura of ancient resilience as it lumbered out onto the fractured remnants of a melting ice field. Its eyes glimmered with both ferocity and sorrow. It was as if the bear, a timeless embodiment of a vanished era, had been summoned to fulfill a final, redemptive duty, to protect the dwindling vestiges of human civilization and to stand as a guardian of nature's resurrected will. A final showdown loomed where two forces, one representing the dwindling strength and noble legacy of the natural world, and the other embodying the ceaseless, spectral hunger of mankind's own destructive legacy, were destined to clash. With the research station trembling in the background, a symbol of desperate hope amid abandonment, the Wendigo emerged fully from the darkness. Its eyes burned with a feral, ancient malice as it stalked through the weakened barriers of technology and the crumbling ice. The creature's gaunt form was a perverse amalgam of human despair and stolen polar bear vigor, every sinew pulsing with a hunger that threatened to devour all traces of life. Then came the moment of reckoning, on a precarious patch of ice that teetered on the brink of dissolution. The liberated polar bear squared off against the Wendigo. The silence that preceded the clash was heavy with the promise of both destruction and rebirth. In a display of raw, primal power, the bear lunged with the ferocity of countless winters distilled into a single, defiant charge. Its massive paws met the Wendigo with a force that trembled the very ice beneath them. The ensuing battle was a cataclysm of nature's might against ancient, malevolent sorcery. Roars, thunderous echoes of survival, mixed with the eerie cries of a cursed spirit in an otherworldly symphony that shook the shattered remains of the post-apocalyptic landscape. The polar bear, though weakened by years of harsh survival and the ravages of a world undone, fought with an unyielding determination that spoke to the very soul of the Arctic. Every swipe, every bite, carried the weight of generations, while the Wendigo, driven by an insatiable lust for stolen energy, retaliated with spectral speed and ruthless precision. The clash was unrelenting, a desperate, titanic struggle that pitched two ancient archetypes against each other: the bear, a symbol of nature's enduring, albeit fading, power, and the Wendigo, a harbinger of human greed and the chaotic, destructive force it breeds. As the fierce combat raged, the very elements seemed to conspire to seal the fate of the confrontation. The fragile ice, already undermined by relentless global change, trembled under the brute force unleashed upon it. Cracks snaked across the surface, glistening ominously in the pallid sunlight, and a cold dread swept over the battlefield, a harbinger of the inevitable reckoning that nature, in its infinite cruelty and mercy, would reclaim its due tribute. In one moment of heart-stopping intensity, with polar roars echoing against the fractured ice and the Wendigo emitting a soul-wrenching wail that resonated with all the despair of a ruined civilization, the ground convulsed, ice shards fell like deadly rain, and the weakened expanse below began to yield, threatening to engulf both combatants. In that climactic instant, the polar bear's defiant charge and the Wendigo's relentless aggression converged in a final, cataclysmic moment of violence and despair. Amid the cacophony of breaking ice and the furious tumult of battle, the fragile stability of the world shattered. The ice, no longer able to bear the immense weight of ancient power and renewed fury, fractured completely. With a deafening, earth-shattering crack, both the relentless Wendigo and the steadfast polar bear were plunged into the icy, merciless depths below, a plunge that seemed to suspend their fates in the cold, dark womb of the post-apocalyptic ocean. As the turbulent waters closed over them, an eerie, unspoken uncertainty lingered in the air. Had nature finally triumphed? Or had the primordial curse merely been consigned to a dormant, waiting abyss? In the aftermath of the cataclysm, survivors at the beleaguered research station and a scattered few indigenous remnants gathered amidst the ruins, their hearts burdened with grief and hope in equal measure. A heavy silence reigned as they surveyed the shattered landscape, a solemn reminder that the delicate balance of life, long threatened by unchecked ambition and relentless devastation, could be restored only through the cooperation of nature's survivors. In quiet ceremonies that followed in the days after the final battle, elders and scholars alike spoke of the fateful night as a turning point, a moment when nature, even as it wept over its losses, had asserted its ancient mandate. They warned that if the polar bear, emblematic of the few remaining vestiges of life and resilience, could overcome such dark forces, then perhaps there remained hope for a future reborn from the ravages of human greed. Yet, deep in their hearts, a lingering dread persisted. Should the cursed Wendigo's malevolent spirit ever re-emerge, it would herald an age of unimaginable darkness where the remnants of humanity and nature alike would be swallowed by despair. Thus, as the post-apocalyptic sun broke through the ashen clouds and cast its dim, unwavering light upon a world forever altered, the fate of the ancient curse remained shrouded in ambiguity. The polar bear and the Wendigo, locked in their final, unresolved struggle, had been consigned to the depths, leaving behind a legacy of sacrifice and a dire message. The survivors, with solemn resolve, pledged to honor the memory of that fateful night and to work tirelessly for a future where nature's sacred balance might be restored. Their united voices echoed a timeless caution. As long as humanity's heart pulsed with greed and indifference, ancient curses would rise again from the shadows, haunting the remnants of a world in need of healing. In the harsh, trembling light of a future ravaged by climate collapse, the mobile research station clung desperately to existence atop a fragment of what was once a vast, unbroken ice shelf. Inside its reinforced walls, a small team of scientists worked feverishly around the clock, their days measured in frantic data readings, cryogenic preparations, and guarded hopes of reviving the genetic legacy of the polar bear. The station's interior was bathed in a cold, clinical glow, the hum of machinery, the rhythmic beeps of life support systems, and the constant, uneasy murmur of conversations about dwindling resources and the fragile promise of renewal. Every moment was a race against time, for outside, the world was unspooling into a chaotic canvas of melting ice, inundated coastal ruins, and the specter of extinction. Yet as the scientists poured their hearts into their conservation efforts, delicately extracting, preserving, and cataloging the genetic material of the few remaining polar bears, a creeping sense of dread began to puncture their fragile certainty. Reports filtered through of strange noises in the distance, electronic malfunctions that defied rational explanation, and unsettling sightings along the fringes of the station. It started with the disappearance of a routine supply shipment, followed by inexplicable spikes in temperature in the normally frigid corridors. In the midst of these anomalies, the team discovered that one of their most vital conservation subjects, a robust polar bear, vital to their research and marked with a tracking chip, had wandered perilously close to the icy boundary of the station. Though the creature had long been a symbol of hope and nature's undying resilience, its sudden appearance was shrouded in ominous portent. Then came the night of terror. As darkness descended over the barren, post-apocalyptic tundra and the feeble light of a low-hanging moon cast long, ghostly shadows, an unearthly silence fell upon the station. It was within this suffocating quiet that the Wendigo made its presence known, a presence not heralded by thunderous roars or luminous apparitions, but by the gradual creep of malevolence that seeped into every circuit and fiber of the research outpost. Without warning, alarms erupted throughout the station as a series of unexplainable explosions shook the fragile structure. The once reliable generators sputtered and failed, plunging corridors into confusion and darkness punctuated only by the frantic red glows of emergency lights. Panic spread like wildfire among the researchers. In the chaos, figures blurred in the dim corridors as the Wendigo, a spectral being draped in unnatural shadows and subtle crimson glints, stalked the station. It moved with a predatory grace, its presence detectable only through an icy chill that clawed at the edges of warmth and sanity. Within minutes, several scientists vanished, snatched from the relative safety of the control room, leaving behind scattered traces of blood and deep, claw-like marks on the metal walls. The Wendigo's method was precise and horrifying. It was as though it knew exactly where the station's vulnerable souls were gathered. Amid the panic, as desperate shouts and the clamor of overturned equipment filled the air, the remaining team members gathered in the central hub, a small space filled with hastily arranged cryogenic samples, data terminals, and the remnants of meticulously engineered conservation plans. In that frantic moment, The gravity of the ancient curse that had been resurrected by the desecration of a once sacred land was laid bare. The scientists realized that the horror stalking them was not a mere aberration of nature, but the embodiment of a long-forgotten legend, a vengeful Wendigo that had inherited humanity's collapsed hunger, despair, and unbridled greed. In the midst of this mounting crisis, a daring proposal emerged from the oldest and most resolute among them, a plan to harness one last, unyielding force of nature. They would attempt to liberate the polar bear that had been marked and monitored by their research, an animal of mythic endurance and raw, untamed power. The theory was simple yet fraught with peril. In a world overrun by darkness, perhaps the fierce instincts of one great polar bear could serve as a natural protector, a guardian capable of repelling the cursed Wendigo from the station and buying the researchers precious time to regroup. With hearts pounding in collective fear and hope, the team assembled a small task force. In the dim, flickering light of the emergency corridors, they gathered around one of the containment units, a reinforced, makeshift pen that had been used to temporarily secure the animal for study. The polar bear, though gaunt and wearied by the harsh conditions, still exuded an aura of majestic defiance. Its eyes, deep and knowing, seemed to glow with a latent power born from countless generations of survival in the icy wilderness. The decision was made swiftly and without hesitation. If they could free this lone guardian, they might turn the tide against the insidious Wendigo. Outside, the world had transformed into a battleground, as the Wendigo's dark presence prowled the perimeter, leaving behind a trail of devastation and eerie silence. The researchers worked feverishly to unlock the containment unit. With trembling hands, they disabled the tracking system and opened the reinforced door, releasing the polar bear back into the perilous fray. The creature emerged into the cold night with a rumbling growl, a sound that resonated with both sorrow and an ancient, unspoken oath. It padded cautiously toward the station, every measured step a testament to its enduring connection with the wild. Even as the specter of human despair loomed large, in the ensuing moments, the station became a hothouse of desperate confrontation. The Wendigo, sensing a challenge to its dark dominion, intensified its assault, slithering through the corridors and smashing through steel with a savagery that defied the natural order. The freed polar bear soon found itself at the center of this chaos. Initially hesitant and burdened by hunger and exhaustion, its innate instincts kicked in as it spotted the Wendigo prowling ominously near the main entrance. With a thunderous bellow that shook the very foundations of the station, it surged forth. The ensuing clash was as primal as it was apocalyptic, a raw battle between the living force of nature and the spectral manifestation of humanity's long-buried sins. The polar bear, drawing upon the full measure of its ancient strength, leapt and roared in defiance of the Wendigo's otherworldly assaults. Its massive paws, hardened by the icy crucible of countless winters, struck the creature with unyielding force. The Wendigo, agile and elusive, parried with vicious swipes of its spectral claws, each strike a dark echo of a lost world. Fueled by an inexorable hunger that fed on despair, the station trembled with the cacophony of their combat, the clang of metal against primal fury, the shattering of ice as the building structure groaned under the weight of the struggle, and the researchers, bound by terror and hope in equal measure, watched from the safety of shattered alcoves as nature and ancient curse collided in a spectacle of defiance. As the polar bear advanced, its roar blended with the frenzied sound of alarms and panicked shouts, a cacophonous chorus that spoke of a world teetering on the brink of oblivion. The Wendigo, real and yet impossibly spectral, darted in and out of the shadows, its form shifting like a wraith caught between realms. In a series of harrowing moments, the bear managed to drive the Wendigo away from the station's core, its massive frame pushing the cursed entity back through broken corridors and out into the vast, uncertain night. Yet even as the bear's valor shone like a beacon in that bleak, post-apocalyptic darkness, the grim reality was that the forces at work were immense and relentless. The researchers, their hope pinned on this singular, living symbol of wild endurance, knew that the battle had only just begun. The Wendigo's cursed essence, nourished by the despair and ruin that had come to define humanity's legacy, would not simply vanish. Instead, its malevolent hunger would persist, as long as the scars of greed remained etched upon the earth. As the night deepened, the struggle continued outside the station. The polar bear, now fully engaged in a life-or-death contest with the relentless specter, fought with every ounce of strength that its marred but mighty form could muster. Each collision between claw and paw, between roars of defiance and spectral shrieks, echoed through the desolation like an ancient lament for the lost era of wild splendor. The land itself seemed to tremble with the intensity of the conflict, and every shattered shard of ice bore witness to the battle between nature's pure spirit and the relentless force of ancient curse. In that turbulent, treacherous night, as the researchers held their collective breaths behind shattered glass and within dim corridors, the harrowing reality of their world was laid bare. The fate of the polar bear, that last living sentinel of an Arctic legacy, and the vile resurgence of the Wendigo were now inextricably intertwined. In the cold glow of alarmed emergency lights and the distant howls of a cursed creature, hope and despair danced on the knife's edge, a fragile balance that would determine whether the future might yet hold a glimmer of renewal or sink deeper into perpetual darkness. Under a sky swollen with the uncertain light of a post-apocalyptic dawn, the mobile research station, once a beacon of desperate hope amid a shattered world, stood precariously on a thin fragment of ice that quivered beneath relentless environmental decay. The station's walls, scarred by explosions and soot, bore silent testimony to the earlier terror when the Wendigo had invaded its corridors and claimed lives in a frenzy of spectral savagery. Now, in the lingering aftermath of chaos, the battered scientists gathered their dwindling strength to face the final hour. Their hearts pounded in anxious unison. For outside, on the trembling ice and in the murky shadows of broken cities half swallowed by the sea, the ancient curse stirred once more. At the edge of the station, where the last remnants of engineered containment met the natural, fractured ice of the Arctic, the polar bear, an aged, lone guardian whose body still echoed the legacy of untamed wilderness, stood as the last symbol of a vanishing era. Though emaciated and weathered by endless seasons of struggle, its eyes shone with a fierce spark, as if summoning the fierce ancestral power of a time when polar bears ruled these frozen realms unchallenged. The scientists had released the animal in a desperate bid to harness its primal strength as a shield against the cursed specter. Now, the bear's massive form loomed against the shifting horizon, silhouetted by the ashen glow of a weak, post-apocalyptic sun. From the darkening fringe of the ruins beyond the station, the Wendigo emerged once again, a twisting, sinewy figure of spectral malevolence and desperate hunger. Its body, now a grotesque amalgamation of its ancient essence and the stolen vigor of the fallen guardians, moved with an uncanny blend of feral speed and ghostly grace. The creature's eyes burned with a cruel, unholy light that seethed with an endless appetite for life's residual energy. And every step it took left deep, jagged scars in the fragile ice. It had been nourished by the decay of forgotten cities and the despair of human cruelty. And in that nourishment, its power had grown, making it both more unstoppable and more tragic. In the final confrontation, as the fragile ice trembled beneath the combined weight of nature's last defiant guardian and the Wendigo's resurrected curse, the two forces collided in a spectacle of raw, elemental fury. The polar bear roared, a sound not only of pain but of a deep, unyielding determination rooted in the ancient rhythms of the wild. With a ferocity that defied its emaciated frame, the bear charged forward, its muscular limbs pounding the unstable surface as it met the Wendigo head-on. The creature's claws, honed by centuries of spectral hunger, slashed the air in a barrage of dark intent. Metal groaned and ice shattered in a cacophony of violence as the two titanic forces exchanged blows, a symphony of roars, shrieks, and the sound of splintering ice that seemed to echo the long-forgotten battles of nature itself. For a moment, time itself appeared to slow as the polar bear, with a desperate leap born of pure instinct, clamped its jaws around a shifting limb of the Wendigo. The creature writhed in response, its stolen strength faltering under the crushing force of nature's defiant bite. All the while, the unstable ice beneath them groaned in protest as fissures spread like scars across its surface. Each impact reverberated like a heartbeat of the planet, the ice's eventual collapse a grim counterpoint to the bear's unyielding determination. The battle raged on as the researchers, hidden in trembling safe havens within the station's remnants, watched with a mix of horror, awe, and a desperate hope that somehow, this last vestige of wild strength might save them all. Every savage swipe of the bear's powerful paw, every lacerating strike of the Wendigo's spectral claws, carried with it the weight of ages, a reminder of both nature's terrifying beauty and its capacity for renewal. The polar bear, embodying the dwindling spirit of a vanished ecosystem, fought not only for its own survival but for the revival of a world that had been scarred by relentless exploitation. Its roars merged with the wind, carrying the ancient promise that nature, though battered, could still reclaim its rightful balance. Amid this brutal contest, the fragile state of the ice became the ultimate arbiter. Beneath the unyielding light of an indifferent sun, the ice's hold weakened further as the relentless battle tore at its very fabric. With an ominous, resounding crack that reverberated through the desolate expanse, the ice began to fracture on a massive scale. In the ensuing chaos, both combatants were thrown into a maelstrom of shifting ice and icy water. The boundary between land and sea dissolving in an instant. The polar bear, its massive form propelled by a surge of adrenaline and raw instinct, struggled desperately against the pull of the melting surface. The Wendigo, its spectral body buffeted by the chaotic force, let out one final, guttural wail, a sound that was both a dirge for what was lost and a promise of eventual return. For long, the survivors on the station and the scattered indigenous remnants who had witnessed the confrontation were left in a state of agonized uncertainty. The shattered ice, now nothing more than a crumbling mosaic on the edge of a vast, dark ocean, bore neither victory nor defeat with clarity. Had the polar bear, emblematic of nature's fading but indomitable spirit, emerged triumphant enough to ignite a spark of renewal amid the ruins? Or had the cursed Wendigo, battered into retreat and cast down into the merciless depths, merely been forced into a temporary dormancy, its malevolent hunger lying in wait under a fragile veneer of peace? In the bittersweet afterglow of that apocalyptic confrontation, as dawn broke slowly over a horizon shrouded in mist and regret, the survivors gathered amidst the remnants of the research station. Indigenous elders, their eyes deep with ancestral grief and cautious wisdom, murmured solemn warnings over flickering fires. They recounted the battle as a tale of both heroic defiance and a somber omen, that as long as humanity continued to fan the flames of greed and neglect the delicate balance of the earth, ancient curses like the Wendigo would never be permanently consigned to oblivion, but would return to haunt the remnants of a once vibrant world. The polar bear, though grievously injured and burdened with the scars of a desperate fight, slowly limped away from the crumbling battlefield, its eyes, dark and sorrowful yet still burning with the trace of defiant spirit, turned toward the distant lands, a silent call for nature's rebirth. The surviving researchers, filled with a cautious, almost unthinkable hope, resolved to document every detail of that fateful night, to learn from the myriad lessons etched in blood and shattered ice, and to honor the legacy of a creature that had stood as the last guardian of a natural world on the brink. As the new day stretched its fragile light over the ravaged terrain, the fate of both beast and curse hung in an uneasy truce, a suspended moment where the powers of nature and the specter of ancient malevolence lay locked in a state of indefinite ambiguity. The frozen remnants of the ice bore silent witness to the eternal struggle between renewal and decay, a living testament that in the relentless cycle of destruction and rebirth, no victory was ever absolute, and every shadow of greed could someday give rise to a new, dark incarnation. Thus, beneath a sky both mournful and resolute, the saga of Polar Bear and Wendigo, Frozen Memories in a Post-Apocalyptic Future, reached its poignant, yet open-ended conclusion. The polar bear's valiant, bittersweet battle had kindled a spark, a fragile promise that nature, no matter how battered, can still resist, and that the legacy of ancient curses, like those borne by the Wendigo, will always haunt the edge of human achievement. In that uncertain morning light, survivors and indigenous voices alike vowed to honor the lessons learned, carrying forward a solemn pledge to balance human ambition with the fragile, enduring pulse of the earth. Under a sky heavy with the pallid light of a muted sun, The mobile research station, once a symbol of human innovation and hope for rescuing the polar bear gene pool, stood precariously on the remnants of a shattered ice shelf. The station, its walls scarred by past attacks and its corridors dimly lit by emergency bulbs flickering against the chaos of melting technology, was the last refuge for a ragged band of scientists who clung desperately to survival. They had labored day and night to cryogenically preserve the embryos and capture the last live polar bear. An animal tagged with a tracking chip that had become their final hope, a living emblem of nature's defiant spirit amid the carnage wrought by climate change. But as the ice beneath the station groaned in protest and distant tides eroded what was left of the frozen frontier, an even older threat had risen from the abyss of forgotten legend. Deep in the dwindling shadows beyond the station's perimeter, where the ruined vestiges of once proud coastal cities had sunk beneath turbulent waters and dense fog, the Wendigo lingered, this accursed entity, born not only of ancient indigenous myth but also of the human cost of greed and desolation, had survived the collapse of society by feeding on the despair permeating the ruined world. Its form, gaunt and spectral, with eyes that glowed like embers amid the darkness, had evolved to steal the vitality of anything it touched, growing stronger as it absorbed the remnants of collapsed human dreams and the life force of any creature unlucky enough to cross its path. In this desolate landscape, very few polar bears still roamed the shattered Arctic. These majestic creatures, once abundant symbols of wild beauty, had been reduced to isolated wanderers, thin, starved, and haunted by the loss of the realm that had been their home for millennia. They drifted across isolated patches of ice that bobbed on a turbulent, warming sea, their presence both a testament to nature's enduring will and a mournful reminder of what had been lost. And now, as if summoned by the same winds that carried both devastation and hope, the Wendigo began its relentless hunt for survivors. Its unnatural scent, a twisted fusion of decay and primal ferocity, wafted across the barren expanse as it stalked through crevices of broken ice and drowned fragments of civilization. One fateful, sun-scorched afternoon, the day when the fragile boundaries between hope and annihilation became irreversibly blurred, the research station was besieged. Without warning, the Wendigo descended like an omen upon the station's beleaguered corridors. In the midst of routine activities and the quiet hum of scientific instruments, alarms shattered the oppressive silence. Machinery sputtered as the cursed entity infiltrated the station, its claws raking through metal and circuitry with spectral precision. Panicked screams and frenzied shouts mingled with the dissonant clatter of falling debris as the Wendigo claimed its victims one by one, leaving behind cryptic, crimson-stained marks on the walls and floors. In that maelstrom of terror, the carefully preserved polar bear, the solitary, tracking-tagged guardian of life, became a symbol of humanity's last grasp at salvation. With hearts pounding in shared terror and determination, the remaining scientists convened in a cramped control room. Amid the chaos, their leader's voice, low and trembling with both fear and resolve, declared that the only hope for their survival lay in the untamed spirit of nature. By releasing the polar bear from its confines, they might harness its wild, defensive instincts to stave off the onslaught of the ancient curse. It was a desperate gamble, a final plea to nature itself to rise once more in defense of life. Outside, under a sky streaked with the faded brilliance of what once was, a team of scientists and a contingent of indigenous guardians rushed to a reinforced containment unit. They quickly disabled the tracking apparatus, unlocking its heavy iron door. As if emerging from the long, frozen void of oblivion, the polar bear lumbered out, its gaunt frame bearing both the ravages of endless hardship and an indomitable spark of ancient power. For a brief, poignant moment, it regarded its liberators with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of eons, a silent vow to protect what little remained of the wild. Meanwhile, the Wendigo, sensing the stirrings of hope and the resurgence of life that threatened to unseat its dark dominion, surged forward with a malice that sent shivers across the station's dilapidated structure. It prowled with unnerving speed among the broken corridors and spilled equipment, its presence a chilling reminder that some curses are immortal, sustained by the very essence of the human condition. Its arrival ignited a desperate confrontation, a collision between two forces that, though born of the same ancient earth, had diverged into diametrically opposing embodiments. 1. The polar bear, a fading relic of a time when nature reigned supreme. And the other, the Wendigo, a nightmarish specter fueled by the ruin and despair of humanity's excess. The final battle unfolded upon a precarious stretch of ice on which the station's fate had become suspended. Under the relentless glare of the post-apocalyptic sun, the freed polar bear advanced with an intensity born of primal instinct and survival. Its heavy paws pounded against the fractured ice with each resolute step, echoing through a barren landscape where even the winds whispered of loss and rebirth. The Wendigo, its ghastly form illuminated by a baleful red glow, met the bear with equal, horrifying ferocity. Their clash was a tumultuous symphony of roars and spectral shrieks. Each impact between tooth and claw resonated like a drumbeat that signified the eternal struggle for life itself. In the midst of the final confrontation, the polar bear fought with all the accumulated strength of its ancient lineage, a bittersweet, desperate surge of defiance amid a world on the brink of collapse. With every deliberate lunge, the bear defended the station and its sparse band of survivors, its jaws snapping at the creature's cursed appendages, its massive form a living, breathing manifesto of nature's enduring might. The Wendigo retaliated with all the dark cunning of a being that had fed on despair for generations. It slithered and lashed, its spectral tendrils seeking to ensnare and sap the bear's remaining vitality. The combat shook the fragile ice until it trembled and groaned as if protesting against the abuse of its ancient sanctity. Then came the moment that seemed to suspend time, when, amid the chaos, the trembling ice beneath them reached its breaking point. In an instant that merged fury with inevitability, the fractured surface convulsed violently, with a deafening crack that echoed like the lament of a dying world. The ice splintered under the strain. In a tumult of shattering ice and chaotic despair, both combatants, one embodying the savage spirit of nature and the other, the cursed remnant of humanity's darkest impulses, were hurled toward the abyss. For a heartbeat, the world hung in a limbo of suspended judgment. The polar bear, its eyes still ablaze with the resolute fire of survival, fought against the icy pull as it tumbled downward, its massive form a solitary beacon amid the unyielding tide of water. The Wendigo, too, writhed in a final, agonized contortion, its malevolent energy buckling under the crushing force of the collapsing ice. In that fateful, heart-stopping moment, the fate of both ancient guardians and accursed spirits became shrouded in uncertainty, like shadows mingling in the depths of a long-forgotten winter. In the aftermath, as the turbulent waters swallowed the remnants of the shattered ice and the chaotic echoes faded into a profound, eerie silence, survivors from the station gathered on the unstable, reforming ice. Their faces, pale and drawn, betrayed the hope that clung to every whispered vow and every tear-streaked apology for past transgressions. Indigenous elders, whose voices had long carried the warnings of ancient lore, murmured solemn reminders that nature's balance was sacred, a fragile harmony that must be honored lest the curses of the past rise again. The research team, united by their shared loss and an unyielding desire to salvage a future from the ruins of the past, recorded every detail of the final battle. Their data, as chilling as it was invaluable, would serve as a testament to the day when nature's wrath and ancient malediction had converged, a day that would echo in the annals of history as both a warning and a call to redemption. The freed polar bear, though battered and partially overcome by the sudden descent into the icy depths, had left an indelible mark on the hearts of all who witnessed its final struggle. Its defiant roar, captured in fleeting moments before vanishing beneath the dark waters, was heralded as a symbol of hope, a reminder that the wild, no matter how diminished, could still stand against the encroaching darkness. Yet as the survivors stared into the horizon, a lingering, bittersweet ambiguity remained. Had the Wendigo truly been vanquished? Or had it only been forced into a dormant state, subsumed by the chaotic forces of nature? The fate of this cursed spirit, much like the fragile remnants of the ice that crumbled beneath the weight of human ambition, was left uncertain, a haunting promise that as long as greed and neglect festered in the hearts of man, ancient evils might one day resurface with renewed ferocity. Thus, in the final light of a post-apocalyptic dawn, When the shattered ice glimmered with faint traces of hope and the ocean whispered the secrets of a troubled past, the legacy of that desperate day was etched indelibly into the soul of the Arctic. The polar bear's courageous stand, the researchers' fevered attempts to preserve life, and the curse of the Wendigo that lurked in the shadows together formed a tapestry of both warning and resilience. In that uncertain moment, as survivors vowed to honor nature's fragile balance and to rebuild a world scarred by human folly, an eternal truth shone forth: the future remains unwritten, and the wild, untamed spirit of the earth may yet rise again to reclaim its rightful place, even if it must forever battle the specters of ancient curse and unbridled ambition.